Okay, YouTube, Raptor here, and welcome to this in-depth look at constructing a HOTAS profile for Star Citizen right from scratch, with the 2.6 build being somewhat of a landmark for the game, bringing out some changes to the flight model and also to controller mappings. I felt as though my control profile was really due a bit of a refresh, and so I decided to share this method for starting over right from the beginning with you here today. This is going to be of most use for those of you that use the same peripherals as me, of course, because every controller input that you could choose is somewhat different. But I'm hoping it'll still be useful to anyone that wants to customize their controls in Star Citizen and that everyone can get something from this tutorial. We're going to be going over all the controls available to us in the game, and I'll be giving a bit of an explanation in places where things might not be too obvious for newer players. I'm also going to be looking at the default keyboard layouts and bindings, as this has an impact on my controller setup, the way I have things set up in Star Citizen, and I'll be giving some recommendations on some of the default keys that you may wish to rebind right from the start. So first of all, quick disclaimer, everything I'm going to show you here today is personal preference to some extent or other, and the results really of time I've put in over the various alpha builds of the game, starting right from quite early on in Star Citizen's lifespan. And the main goal in recording this video is just to give an example of how to approach the task efficiently, because you can end up sinking hours into just getting a reasonable HOTAS set up for Star Citizen. And if you don't have a plan, believe me, it's easy to put yourself into a position of having to redo some or all of the work, and you can legitimately end up sinking hours into just setting up controls. So let's get into this. First thing to note, or rather to restate, is that Star Citizen is in alpha, and this means that nothing that is in the game currently can be assumed to be final or complete and is all open to change. There's also various bugs and problems that exist in this build, and at some stage obviously CIG will choose to patch these out. They might choose to change the default schemes entirely of how the controls are laid out. The first point I want to really make that relates to this is that it definitely can help to have a set procedure for everything regarding controls to Star Citizen. When reattaching your controls to your PC, you want to remember which order you do it in, and each and every time make sure you're doing everything in the same order when you're restarting the game. If you notice in Windows, it will assign devices one at a time when you plug them back into your PC. And as we'll come to see later in Star Citizen, you don't get to see which device is which. They get shown a number. You'll have device 1, device 2, device 3, device 4, if you have that many, and so on. So it can get confusing quickly, and whichever device was plugged in first, that'll be the device that's device number 1. So if you reload the control profile in some occasions and that number 1 is now number 2, well, guess what? You have to remap your keys or replug your controllers, whichever is the least hassle of the two. Right, so the example kit I'm going to be using is the CH Products HOTAS, and that comprises of a CH Pro throttle, a CH Combat stick, and also have a set of MFG Crosswind rudder pedals. And if there's time at the end of this video, I'll also be touching up on tablet control, using an NVIDIA Shield tablet, which you can use as additional button mappings for when you don't want to necessarily use the keyboard, but you want that bit of immersion. You can use a tablet, although very much optional, as with everything I'll be showing here today. Future plans for my setup include adding voice attack at some point, which is a system that allows you to bind keyboard macros to voice commands. There is a really nice profile out there called Anna, which is a almost fully functional ship's computer, which is well worth looking into. I'll try and remember to put a link in the description to that one. Also TrackIR, which I already have. The support for it is a little bit broken in Star Citizen at the moment, but it's essentially an infrared controller, which you attach one end to your headset, your headphones. The other end sits above your monitor, and it allows you to move your head to control the camera within the game, which is pretty nice in terms of immersion. So at some point I will be trying some of the hacks that are out there to get that working. When I do get around to setting these up, I may well do some additional videos if that would be of interest to anyone. So, do subscribe to the channel if you want to be alerted to future videos that come from me. So, with that being said, let's get going and start setting everything up. Okay, so getting into this then. In terms of ordering how I attach the devices, in my personal setup, everything remains connecting to my machine at all times for the most part. As I said before, if you're physically replugging devices into your PC each and every time, you're going to want to just make a note of which order you plug those in to make sure Windows isn't doing anything funky with device 1 being device 2 and so on and so forth. In terms of software, I take the same approach, whereas I'll open the same software in the same order, and just so I've got a flight plan, as it were, ready to go, so that there's no unexpected surprises, and that's just one less thing I have to think about. So in terms of my setup, first thing I open is the MFG configurator tool. This is basically I just open this to check my pedals are reading correctly. Very rarely will I need to recalibrate anything here. You can see down the bottom you've got a raw axis reading in this software, which shows the rotational axis, x-axis, which is my left toe brake, and y-axis, which is my right toe brake. Although these aren't buttons, these are honest to goodness axis. If needs be, I recalibrate these here, but it's very rare that I will have to. If you own a set of these pedals, I'm sure you know how to calibrate these by now. The maker of these MFG pedals has a very clear and easy to follow tutorial on how to set everything up on their YouTube channel, so obviously go and check that out. So that's that. Second piece of software is DI View. Now this is a tool I use just to get a visual representation and set a dead zone also on the rotational axis. You can see there's already a bit of one set with MFG, but I add one here as well, which isn't additive, it is over the top, so there's some overlap there. Now I actually set this dead zone to 25%, which I already did before hitting record. This might seem a little bit high, but actually after some playing around I found this to be about right to make sure there's no accident inputs that would otherwise remove speed when you're traveling along. You don't want to be accidentally putting one of these, which we'll come on to in a minute. DI View in general is a great little application. It shows the raw input for any device that you could choose. I've got this set up for MFG, but this isn't an MFG specific tool. It can be used for any of your joysticks. And as you saw, you have options to set dead zone, saturation, and pretty much that's all you'll be using this for. So yeah, recommend checking this one out if you want to have a look at how your devices are reading. Third piece of software I need is my CH Control Manager version 4.55, which is the controller software for my HOTAS itself. Now, normally all that I do here is a quick physical check of the controls in direct mode to make sure it's calibrated correctly, and then I switch it over to mapped mode, which loads the previous profile. In this case, obviously, for the benefits of this video, we'll be making a new profile from scratch. Just briefly, three modes are off, direct, and mapped. Off being off, direct being the device showing up as a normal standard Windows controller without any software affecting the inputs, basically just straight pass-through kind of mode. And mapped being the full device functionality, being able to set macros, the full control in a high level of detail of everything you'd want to do with this software. So let's make a new wizard. First step is selecting what I've got, which is combat stick and pro throttle. Ability to map into one device. I would say this is somewhat personal preference. There's really no need for Star Citizen. This is more to cater to older software that wouldn't support multiple controllers, but Star Citizen can perfectly handle multiple inputs, so we say no to this. CMS, again, this is getting into the advanced realms of this specific software. Basically, it allows you to program special functions into this software. I've never actually used this, but if you don't include it as your profile, there's no option to add it later, so add it because why not? And then that's about that. And you can see once I've added it, I've now got a representation of my attached my stick, my throttle, and the CMS controls, which, as we said, is the special functions here. So we've got a basic device we can work with. It's in off mode. If we switch to direct mode and calibrate the inputs, make sure everything is reading correctly. Start with the throttle. Quick calibration here. I'll go into a bit more detail on the device, but it's the standard. As you would with any joystick, it needs to read where all the axes are, throttle forward and back. I will note that on this specific throttle there is a tiny bit of jitter. It doesn't really work to add a dead zone as much as it does just to slightly edge off so that it reads back as slightly further forward, if that makes sense. So that's how I tend to do this. It's literally, we're talking a millimeter, so it's not noticeable in the game. But you can see that snaps now to the top, so now we're forward and back, and hopefully, yep, no jitter. Perfect. And then the same with the joystick. Left, right, forward, back, center. And the throttle wheel, I don't actually use this, so calibrate it, and then apply. Done. So that's that. I'll now go over what I've got available to me here, and I recommend you do the same on whatever device that you're using. The way to approach this is to first consider how many analog axes you have to work with. You're going to want to have analog controls for as many of the following in the game as possible, and I recommend in this priority, in this order. So pitch up and down being the most important one, which is your nose of your ship up and down, your left and right, which is the nose of your ship left and right, roll, and then following those, the strafing movements. So you want as many of your strafes as possible on analog controls, although you probably want to focus primarily on up and down, followed by forwards and backwards, and then lastly left and right strafe if you're limited by how many axes that you have available to you. Well, that's, obviously, again, open for debate, personal preference, all of that. This really brings me on actually quite neatly into the way, and to the reason, that I went for this HOTAS specifically over other options available, and that's the mini stick, which is right here. As of now, as of the time of recording this, which is New Year's Day 2017, this CH product throttle is the only throttle that I'm aware of on the market that has an honest-to-goodness mini stick. In other ways, it's not the best throttle. You can find other YouTube videos with reviews going into detail about some of potential shortcomings, although nothing about this is terrible. It feels comfortable to use. The actual throttle slide itself is pretty damn loose. That's the problem. This could probably be modded in some way, which I haven't done. But the fact that you get a mini stick and the fact that this software, this CH Control Manager software, is so bloody good, I recommend this device as a controller for Star Citizen. Now, at some point in the future, Cytec is going to be releasing a controller specifically for Star Citizen in partnership with CIG. So it's going to be interesting to see how that turns out. Now, potentially, I might pick up one of those as a replacement to the CH setup, and I'll do a video if I do that. Honestly, I'm not, though, 100% sold on the concepts that they've shown thus far. They're using trackballs, of all things, as the extra axis controls. I think there was one on the joystick and one on the throttle, which to me is it looks really weird madness. I would much prefer they implemented a mini stick, as we have here, because this feels great in terms of you can pretty much map any axis you would want to, and you'll have that fine level of control over it, whereas a ball, you just don't know where you're sliding here and there, and never really like trackballs. But hey, we'll see how it turns out. Regardless, as I keep saying, any controller is your own personal preference. I'd recommend, though, no matter what your device is, spend the time on planning. Hopefully this guide can just show you the planning aspect, even if you're not using this controller, because it is easy to spend hours getting into it and then realize you made a mistake and then having to start over, which I've done in an earlier build of the game where the menu options were less forgiving. and it's soul destroying. You give up and you come back another day. Essentially, if you already spent an hour setting up your controls, then it's pretty bad. Other noteworthy mentions in terms of choices you might want to look into, dual stick controls. A lot of people are saying are good options at the moment. You're obviously going to need, if you're assuming you're right-handed, you're going to need some kind of ambidextrous mouse for your stick, for your left hand. But to have two sticks instead of a throttle, perfectly good option. The other option you may wish to investigate is some kind of stick and mouse combo, so you're aiming with a mouse, but you've still got your analog access on the stick hand. So that's something to consider. This joystick, just as a side note, has no twist axis, but I've got the rudder pedals for that. So obviously, if you don't have rudder pedals, you might well prefer a joystick with a twist functionality, although personally I don't like the feel of twist on a joystick. I like it to be a joystick. But again, personal preference. So with that being said, the absolute first thing I recommend you do, no matter what you have as your controller set up, is decide which analog axis you're going to want to use and where you're going to want them to be assigned. This setup, and after I've been experimenting with this in various different configurations, I've settled on obviously pitch up and down for the stick. On the stick y-axis. On the stick x-axis, I have that as my yaw, which is left and right nose. In a traditional aeroplane, this would be roll, of course, but for space combat, yaw is almost undeniably better in terms of controlling your aim. Not many people will make an argument for roll in terms of space combat. You might want to stick with roll if you're, spent years on flight sims and you're just transitioning over, and it would just feel completely alien to have some kind of yaw as an x-axis, but if you can get your head around it, highly recommend that being the yaw. For my pedals, as I touched on before, I've actually got 3 axes here, which is the rotational axis and then the 2 toe brakes. I actually use, and this is why I said a dead zone, I actually use my rotational axis for strafe left and right, which is a bit weird, but it feels nice to me to do it that way. Most people will use this rotational axis as a roll axis, and if you're just mapping this for the first time, I would probably recommend honestly the roll axis, unless you feel you don't want to use your legs so much and you prefer to have strafe, which arguably is less common. And then I've got the 2 toe brakes, which I have as strafe backwards on my left and strafe forwards on my right, which kind of mimics, I don't know, like driving a car in some ways, like an automatic, I suppose. So you can be lazy and just have your forwards and backwards on your toes if you're just goofing around and not really in combat. And then last but not least, the mini stick, which is my other 2 axis, X and Y axis on here. And this is where my X axis is where I put my roll, and the Y axis I have up and down thrusters. Again, the mini stick on this is pretty accurate. It's fine for roll and it's fine for up and down, so no real problems there. Obviously, if you don't have rudder pedals, you'll be mapping pitch and yaw to your analog axis almost certainly, and then the rest of the functions are going to be digital button presses in some way, shape or form, unless you have, as I say, a twist stick, in which case twist will almost certainly be roll, or you could have it as strafe, I suppose, but probably it's going to be roll. So once you've decided on what axis you want to be binding to what analog movement, the next step is to have a think about what functions you actually need on the device and what else can remain on the keyboard in terms of button presses. Now, in real world terms, you're not likely to get everything you need onto the joystick with a game like Star Citizen, because there's so many controls. It could be done if you're getting extremely advanced with things like multiple modes, which the CH throttle does actually support if you wanted to go down that route, but it's going to get confusing and the gains are not really worth it in my opinion, unless you've got a specific reason for wanting to do that. If you're some kind of simpit where you don't have a keyboard for whatever reason, but again, you're going to want to type into chat, so you're probably always going to have a keyboard. The main things to consider are that the commands that you're going to be needing to reach quickly are easy to reach and intuitive. You definitely want to spend the time here. No, most people are going to ignore this advice. You're going to want to label at least the main buttons that you'll be using out before you even open the game, in my opinion, if you know what your game controls are. Or as you go along with this video, grab pen and paper or a spreadsheet and start jotting down what you think your controls are going to be. It'll just save you less hassle in the long run if you know, right, this is, we won't go for fires, but if you know, say, okay, well, this is going to be my auto land, this is going to be my, jump drive, etc., etc., etc. You can do it however you want, but that's how I would recommend you approach it for ease. I've already done multiple iterations of my controller settings, and I still wouldn't consider this perfect, but it is good enough for what I want to accomplish as far as the alpha is concerned. So yeah, bearing that in mind, let's go and re-add the controls to this new profile. So we have a bit of a plan for when we actually get into the game. Basically, you've got a comment section here. What I do is I write out, whatever my controls are going to be into each of these comments. So again, I've got a nice visual representation. If you don't have this built into your software, recommend you jot this down on a bit of paper or whatever you're using. Save you the pain of me going and mapping all these controls, these extra buttons. I'm going to stop the video here, and we'll come back and it'll all be done. Okay, so I've gone and I've filled out my comment section for all of the controls here on the HOTAS. What I'm going to do is briefly run through all of the controls that I've selected in case you want to apply this to your own devices by following this tutorial. And don't worry if you don't know specifically what any of these certain functions that I'm going to mention do, because we're going to go through each and every control that's in the game after this when we take a look at the keyboard mappings. But for now, so we've got obviously pitch and yaw on the stick. So for this particular device, they're obviously DirectX devices because they're going to be read as analog access in the game. So this is what we touched on before with the CH Control Manager assigning these to DirectX devices. So stick is device 1. I've set a sensitivity as a bit less, and I set a very small dead zone onto my pitch and yaw axis. I also set a joystick curve. Now, if you don't know about joystick curves, a very, very brief overview is essentially it will start off like this, which is a straight diagonal line through. What this diagonal line represents is a one-to-one movement of the stick. You may look at this and think at first glance that this is the most accurate way to fly, because I'm moving the stick and it's one-to-one transition. But even real-life aircraft tend to have a curve applied to the stick, an actual curve. And this is primarily done, or almost exclusively done, to give a more precise control at a certain point in the stick. So for example, as I have it here, if we take a look, near the center of the stick, where you might wish to make sort of a fine adjustment to the nose, this is where the curve comes into play. A standard S-curve, as it's called, like this one, which I've got set up in the Control Manager, will equate to a greater physical distance on the stick around the center. So again, for precision, for tweaking fine adjustments. Towards the outside range of the stick, where you're likely just to want to be making a fast turn anyway, the stick becomes less precise in a way, but it reduces the movement needed to max out the stick, so it's actually better. So as I've probably said about 100 times so far, this is personal preference. You're going to want to play around with this in-game, probably leave it just as standard or just as a curve like I've got it here to begin with, and then you can obviously tweak it to your heart's content. I prefer to have this on my stick, but you may wish to use the controls in-game for your joystick curves, which we'll come on to when we take a look at the in-game controls. So aside from that, on the stick, button 1 is my primary fire. Note that I've just put game here just to remind myself what's an actual game mapping as opposed to a macro. Button 3, which is up here, is my secondary fire. So you've got the option of more than 2 groups worth of fire within Star Citizen. You're only going to really want to use 2 normally. You can bind extra controls to extra groups if you have them available. Button 2 is my missile lock button. Button 4, which is down here, is my missile launch button. Button 5 up here is countermeasures. Now, I did have this set to a macro, which would launch countermeasure, switch the type of countermeasure, and then launch the next, and then switch back. But mapping of countermeasures, as again I'll show you in the game in a minute, is broken right now. There's a bug regarding that. So for now, this both launches and cycles countermeasures. So that in the heat of battle, you're just spamming this countermeasure button, and it's flares and chaffs all the way. You're getting out of missile locks at the cost of spending more countermeasures by doing that. But in real world terms, it's actually a bit more useful in my opinion. And the other one that I have set as a direct one is this pin target button up here. Now you see it's both pin target and it's cycle pin targets. So my normal action on this controller, again your controller might support the same thing, is to pin the target, and what they call a shifted action is to cycle pin targets. Now what I've done is I've left one button, which is on my throttle here, button 3, the middle one, as a shift button. You can see the shift sticks here. What this allows me to do is double up on the available functions that I have, as long as I'm not using DirectX mode, as long as I'm using these program functions, which are keyboard macros essentially. So just to go over it again, with a normal press without the shift button being held, that's going to just pin the target. But if I was to hold the shift button and then also press this button 6, it would cycle my pin targets instead of pinning whatever target I've got selected. So as I say, doubles the amount of buttons that you have on your HOTAS, which is great. More buttons, always a good thing. So aside from that, my first hat, I only use the up, down, left and right on all my hats. This one only has 4, but these point of view ones have more, but you don't really want to be messing around with these diagonals, a bit cumbersome. So hat 1 up I use as target reticle focus, which is a bit of a weird name. It's target the ship in front of you, friend or foe, doesn't matter. If it's in your reticles, it will target it. Down I use to target the nearest hostile. Left is reverse cycle hostile, and right is cycle hostile forwards. My POV hat, again I use up, down, left and right. Up is cycle all targets, and then I've got toggle lights as a secondary binding with the shift key. Point of view down is cycle friendly targets. Left is look left, which is better in this version of the build. The previous one wasn't so much, but this is okay. And right is look right. Again, I'd like to have this set up to use the track IR instead, but for now, left and right is kind of nice to have on the stick. So that's the stick. Throttle, obviously throttle is a throttle. Note that I've got this set to a slider rather than a standard throttle, which just means it's a one-to-one, basically, percentage-based system as opposed to an actual kind of throttle weirdness in the game. It just felt wrong to have it set as a throttle, so I've had this set as a slider. I don't use any kind of dead zone on this because I have a 1 or 2 or 3% dead zone in the game that I use, which I think is the default. The micro stick, which is the other analog axis here, I have as x-axis is roll. There's no curve on there that is needed, and I have strafe up and down, which I do have a slight curve on. I reduced the sensitivity of this down to 85 on both, and I set a bit of a dead zone because they're strafing thrusters. They don't need to be super accurate around the middle, and you don't want to accidentally press them as it scrubs off speed in this game. Also up and down I have it set to as a reverse input, so down is up and up is down. So hat 1, which is at the back here, so this is one of those hats where, you know, nothing I'm going to be needing all the time or in a quick situation, shall we say, so it's okay for it to be a little bit out of reach. So hat up, which is towards me, as I'm sitting holding this, is toggles the landing gear on and off, and a shifted action is to toggle the quantum drive system. Down is to lock on the landing target, and the shifted action is to engage the quantum drive. Left is to engage auto land, and right is to cycle the zoom range on your radar, which allows you to basically zoom in and out the little radar that's in the center of your ship HUD. Hat number 2, which is up here, away from me, or right, as it appears in the game, is decoupled mode. Up is ComStab toggle, which again will come onto in the game. It's basically it's a flight mode that you can toggle on and off. Back is it shifts between two different flight modes, which is a pre-flight mode, which makes everything super slow but allows you that fine degree of control, or the normal flight mode. And then down is match target speed, and or the shifted action is to scan mode, toggle and pulse, which I haven't really used, but I saw that as an option. I thought, well, might as well bind it and test it out there. Incidentally, this match target speed is incredibly useful. It can be. It was in previous versions of the game where the speed was a lot higher, but even still, if you're fighting NPC ships and you want to match target speed, you're going to be on their tail without crashing into them, which is really useful to have. And then the POV hat. We've got up, which is my G-Force ship mode on and off. You see I have ComStab toggle, I have G-Force toggle, and they're both up, so one is up and the other is up, and it just feels natural doing it that way. Down is another match target speed for now, and shifted action is scoreboard, which is also useful for checking your ping in multiplayer. Left is look behind. This is cycle countermeasures as well, which again, if I've got the time and I don't want to be just spamming this and only want to press it once, I had that set up before, but at the moment I usually leave that unbound. And then the forward is cycle through the various camera modes, which is basically external view of your ship. And the shifted action is another camera toggle, essentially orbit mode toggle, which I don't really use again. Then the other hat I've got is a two-way hat. I've got both up and down at the moment set to space brake. Again, don't really use it, but I was thinking of doing some more racing. So racing, I think you may need a space brake, so I've got that there. And I've got the shifted action is zoom in and out, which can be useful for trying to pick off ships at a distance. The last thing are the buttons on here, so I've got booster on the left one and afterburner on the right one, and then shift again in the middle, like we said before. So that's the basic template. I'd say all the essential features that I need for anything that's in sort of combat are covered for now. The only other thing I can think of that springs to mind is perhaps ship shields, which I don't know if I could put on a shifted action somewhere. That might be something for the future to work out. I had that set up on a tablet, so be that as it may, that might get changed though, because that would involve taking my hands off the throttle or stick just to use it. So what we're going to do next, I'm going to pause the game again, and we're going to load up the game into the game proper. And we're going to have a look at some of the keyboard bindings where we're going to want to change some of the defaults, or I would recommend we change some of the defaults on the keyboard. And then these non-DX mode buttons, so sorry, like this one, we're going to set these as keyboard presses. So just to show you how this is done in CH Control Manager, you can record a keystroke and say, right, I want that to be enter, press enter, exit, and it's enter. Simple as that, and that means as soon as I press this POV right, it's going to trigger enter in the game. So, yeah, going to pause the recording again. Oh yeah, last but not least, as this is a from scratch tutorial, and just to prove there's no smoke or mirrors going on here, in your install folder, which by default is in Program Files and in Cloud Imperium Games, you've got Star Citizen, Public, and then User, and this is your configuration folder. You can see where I've done this before, is if you've got one already, you can add a suffix, so I'll call it .old. You have to give permissions, and basically that is going to be resetting all of my controls, any game settings, all back to their defaults as if I'd started the game new, or create a new one of these user folders for the game to use. The other thing worth mentioning in terms of this, which we'll probably see again later, is inside this user folder you've got controls and then mappings, and this is where these XML files, these are your controllers mappings that you've saved within game. This is where it gets saved. So if you want to make a backup of your mappings and are worried, well, the game's going to get updated, what if I lose my controls, you would just copy this. I'd recommend controlling this, copy this entire controls folder over to another location on your computer, and then you want to update the game, you want to drop these back in and have the game be able to load them. All you do is move them there, overwrite what's already there, and then jobs are good and you're done. Okay, so going to pause the video again. We're going to load up the game and let's take a look at some of the controllers. Okay, welcome back. What I've done here is I've booted into the game. It will have created a new, as we said, it would have created a new user.config file here. Oops, public user, there it is, brand new. I've just got rid of the sound effects and the music volume for now because I don't want this going off while I'm talking. Keyboard changes. Now, I change a few keys from the defaults. Now, the preference is to keep my keyboard bindings as standard as possible, which allows for future changes as you know the available controls have been added and reworked in the past already. The game has a quick reference guide, which I'm sure if you've loaded this up you've seen. If you go to key binding, you've got this display of the default controls here for keyboard and mouse. If you, as far as I'm aware, this is still the case, if you change controls and bind your own ones, this display will not update at all. This is a static image that you can zoom in on, so it's nice to have this here in case you want to check what a certain function is, because you can see quite a lot of controls in this game. As we touched on earlier, I'm favouring binding the keyboard shortcuts over to my HOTAS instead of mapping everything out as DirectX controls as much as possible. It's really optional, as is a lot of the stuff I'm showing you here. So you can feel free to ignore that advice and just map the buttons straight up to game controls, although there are a few reasons why I take that approach. The main one being is if we look over in our control options here, we'll see that these are not labeled as devices. I think I mentioned this earlier, but we've got, you know, this is my joystick is HOTAS 1, this is my throttle, and so on and so forth. It's not picking up the device names that are in Windows, it's just labeling them as HOTAS 1, 2, 3, or 4. So if you're planning out your controls, it can get a bit confusing if you're not, you know, remembering which is number 1, which is number 2. Say your software isn't as easy to read as the CH1 is. Also, the problem where we reconnect controllers, as I've had in the past, as I've said earlier in this video. If you were to reconnect the controllers and 1 became 2 and 2 became 1, well, with only your axis to bind, you might well want to just rebind the axis and save your profile over trying to reconnect controllers so that Windows recognises them correctly, depending on how your computer's configured. So again, easier if they're keyboard keys. There's none of those buttons to rebind in that scenario. Also, as I said before, the shift functionality only exists when I'm using these macros in the CH Control Manager. These DirectX buttons, such as my primary fire, which again I've got as a CM device DX mode because I know I'm not going to want the shift functionality, it becomes a pain when they're shifted. At least it did in previous versions of the game. It wouldn't recognize this shifted action correctly, although you can set it technically. So again, your mileage may vary. It gets confusing. I prefer just to have them as the keyboard devices. Also, I leave the CH Control Manager open on my second screen, which at the moment is my notes for this video. As I use the controls on my stick, it will cycle between them on that display, and it shows the keyboard equivalent in the mappings that I've set out, which can be kind of useful, not only for learning yourself if you want to learn what the keyboard shortcuts actually are, but if you've got friends that are new to the game, for example, and they're saying, well, what key does this? What's the default for checking my scoreboard? Well, I can just hit it and tell them, rather than going out into this options menu and then finding the option, say, oh, it was that. It's just easier for me to glance over to my left and tell them what the key binding is. So that's that. If you don't have an option to do this as part of, say, not running a CH HOTAS and you don't have this, there is another software that you might look into called Joy2Key. I'll post a link in the description of this video. I've dabbled in it briefly in certain other games, but haven't had to use it in Star Citizen as the CH control functionality is good enough for this game. And it basically gives me every option I want. I believe that you also do have the option to set up shifted commands within Joy2Key. So that might be something you want to take a look at if you want to. As I was saying earlier, the big gain is to double the amount of buttons on your HOTAS, and if that's not an option out of the box, then you can use that kind of tool to make it a thing. So yeah, let's have a look at the keyboard commands, and there's a few that we're going to rebind, which is my recommendation to rebind these, and I'll explain some of the others that might not be obvious from the descriptions what they in fact do. So from the options menu, you go to key binding and then advanced control customization, and this allows you, you've got your joystick and HOTAS, your mouse and your keyboard, and everything else allows you to control bind what you want in the game. So each of these menus expands out and it's a sub menu. So the first one I bind is right at the top here, eject. Now you'll notice that self-destruct is right alt and backspace. I keep that as it is, and I like having my eject next to that, as I'm not going to be putting that onto another device. So I make that right alt and equals. There we go. So that one's rebound. Exit seat just means he stands up out of the pilot chair to walk around the ship. I believe that's a hold, by the way, not just a tap of the F button, just so you know. That's all from the flight cockpit. This should all be self-explanatory. Lights, increase and decrease cooler rate. I haven't really had to play with that, if I'm honest, but I think that's for your ship subsystems. You can set it to increase and decrease the cooling on those systems at cost of power management. So in the flight view, I mentioned I use look left and right as on my POV hat, so we need to bind this to something. So let's just do that. I use the quotation key apostrophe, I should say, and the it says backslash. That's actually hash on my keyboard, but it reads correctly. I set those two, so those are the two keys directly to the left of the return key on the keyboard. Set those up. The rest of these should be fairly self-explanatory. Cycle camera view, and at the moment this is F4. I make that insert. Now that's what this used to be in the game. We can say that's okay. This used to be inserted in previous versions again. They changed it to F4 for some reason. I don't like in any game having F4 as a hotkey. I think that's dumb, because what if you've also pressing the Alt key as part of a macro, then you're pressing Alt and F4 together, and we all know what that does. Exits the game. Not what you want. So I recommend any F4s we unbind and make them something else. So insert will do in this scenario. I think that's all. So cycle camera orbit mode essentially allows you to rotate the camera around a fixed position. Zoom in and out, fairly explanatory. It's on the mouse anyway. That's really when you're on third-person view. Not really needed in combat. Dynamic zoom in and out. I'm going to bind these because I'm not using the mouse axis, obviously. So let's set these up. I have these as page up and page down. So page up. This Z offset positive is in your director mode, which doesn't conflict with your standard flight, so that's absolutely fine. Let's do that here as well. Page up, page down. Right, MFDs, just an explanation. I keep these bindings as they are, which is the Z and the A key, the Z and D key, Z and so on and so forth. This is your MFD, stands for multifunction display. So this is the ship's computers essentially. You've got various screens inside your ship where you control some of your ship functionality, and this allows you to focus your camera onto these. So just an explanation. So that's that for the visual options. For the view options. For flight movement, G-force safety. Where is that one? Let's just go through these, make sure there's nothing else I need to explain. These should all be self-explanatory. Cycle mouse move mode. I've never used the mouse in this game, really, so couldn't tell you exactly how that feels differently, but I think that's the strafing factors. I'd have to look that one up, honestly. Swap yaw and roll, again, that's something you'd want to perhaps use if you're using the keyboard and mouse. Throttle min and max, we don't use it. Match target velocity, decouple mode is already bound, which is good. We're going to need that one for later. The next one to unbind. IFCF safeties by the way, that's, as we were saying before, those different flight modes where you can disable everything entirely, which I wouldn't recommend doing. It makes the ship, or at least in the previous versions of the game, it made the ship pretty hard to fly when you would disable all of those. But G-force toggle we definitely want. So let's pick another button that's not used, which is home. Again, this is another decreased DOF depth of field. That's for your movie making mode. And then we'll use end for command stability toggle, which is another ship mode. So this allows me to bind these over to my throttle, and then I can turn G safety on and off. I can change con stab off and on. So that's that. I think that's everything for this one. Yeah. Quantum Drive is basically your hyperspeed. If you haven't played the game before, it allows you to jump between system to system in a way. Right, so targeting. These I don't need to bind any of them to aims because we're using the stick. Right, so let's get on to this look ahead mode. Now I use this as soon as I load into the game. This essentially locks your gimbals, your ship's weapons, dead ahead and allows you to move dead ahead without the ship's cursor sort of going off to one side, which I found extremely annoying. This is instant for me as soon as I load into the game, as I say. So I bind this to keyboard plus, which isn't used by anything meaningful. This is again another cinematic mode control. Once you press this, by the way, it will remain on until you restart the game. Cycle mouse aim mode, again we don't need. Gimbal lock. So just to explain this, this is only useful if your look ahead mode is off. When it's off, what the ship will do, it will still lock the gimbals to middle, but you will still have your ship sort of, your center gimbal floating out to one side for the movement, your positioning of your ship, whereas I like to have it locked all the way. So really, if you're not using look ahead, this is kind of a moot option. You don't need it at all. Reticle focus targets, as we said earlier, it's in with these controls, but it targets any ship that's ahead of you, so definitely a nice one to have mapped. And then I think the rest are fairly self-explanatory. Cycling targets, pinning focus targets, acquiring missile locks. Reticle mode it changes between basically just the reticle with the outline, which is like the full crosshair, or just a dot in the center of your screen. So if you, just for visual targeting reasons, basically. I think that's everything we need to go into in terms of this submenu. The turrets, reticle focus, again, it shouldn't be anything you need to bind for turrets. You're probably going to end up switching to the mouse in all honesty when you use this, which is a shame, but I bind it to the joystick anyway, but you're going to have the option of retaining mouse movement just for accuracy if you're in a turret. Reticle focus is double tap. You might possibly want to undo double tap. To do that, you just highlight whatever control and you press Y and it toggles double tap on or off. I leave it on, I mean it's not really a big deal. I think that's it for this menu as well. All of these should be fairly self-explanatory into what they do. Weapons, again, self-explanatory. These are finer weapons groups. You shouldn't need ever a group 3 or a group 4, really. You can change the bindings on your ship anyway to either be part of group 1 or group 2. So even if by default your ship happens to have a group 3, well, you can unbind that and add the weapons all into another one of your groups, and saves you having to worry about a button for group 3. Under missiles, all there is launch the missile, which I don't know why target missile isn't in there, but hey. Flight defensive, launch countermeasures. Now, as I said, there's a bug currently in the game. I won't demo it here fully, but basically, if you were to assign this to a keyboard binding, it will not take. It will always revert back to a mouse. You can assign it with at least my setup. You can always assign it to a mouse button, but you can't assign it to a keyboard button for some inexplicable reason. I say not worth really demoing here, but if I was to say I could assign this to any keyboard button I went in, it would revert back to mouse. So unfortunately I can't use that as a macro for now, because CH Control Manager doesn't take mouse macros, it only takes keyboard macros. So that's a shame. Everything else here I leave though standard without having to rebind anything. Let's have a look. For power there's nothing I don't think I really wanted to touch on. These are just basically power presets. Increase one of your power ability, shall we say? So your shields, your thrusters, or your weapons at the cost of the others, and then 0 on the keyboard resets it all back to standard, to stock. These again, leave them as keyboard bindings for now, and we'll get into them. You can get into them when you're exploring the game if you need to tweak any of these. For the most part, you can kind of leave things standard and get away with it. Radar, personal identification broadcast system. Again, I think this, I never really use it. I think this is essentially a stress beacon. If, say, your ship was incapacitated and you're floating around in space and you wanted someone to potentially come and pick you up when this gets implemented in the game, you could activate this thing and wait, have a cup of tea and wait for some kind soul to come and pick you up. Cycle radar range will be binding later. Now, HUD, AR mode, which is augmented reality mode. I don't think it's actually working at the moment, but I'll bind it anyway to F2 because why not? Also, take note of scoreboard, which I was going to be using earlier. It's the same as Mobiglus for some reason at the moment, so I bind that to caps lock, which isn't bound to anything. As I say, it's useful to have this just to check your ping as much as the score if you don't want to be looking at the score, but you want to check your latency, your network latency or ping. That's a way of checking that. Right, Flight Arena Commander, you've got respawn here, which it prompts you on screen what respawn is handily enough if you die. Force respawn I've never really used. Social controls, your contacts list is basically your list of friends that are online. Until the new functionality comes in. Your chat window is basically your chat window, toggles it on and off, and return allows you to focus in on your chat window. And right alt and slash is extremely useful. It allows you to bring up a 2D cursor above, so above the game. So if you've got your chat window open, there's a button there to see all your various emotes, which you get by typing into chat. So you can type / and then sleep, and the guy will sleep on the ground, or wave, or dance, or flip the bird, or whatever. This allows you to bring up this 2D cursor, so useful just to know that one. I've had people asking me in game what this is a couple of times, so pointing that out. Right, social invite, accept and reject invite. I guess if someone invites you to a lobby. On foot, I think there's a few I unbind here, and this is for primarily Star Marine, but also in the PU. So you've got your standard movements, W, S, A, and D, WASD. Jump, space, crouch is control, we leave all that standard. Prone is X, useful for exploiting glitches. Sprint, quite standard. Walk, I have this as C. Which is personal preference because I like it being separate to weapon stance, which at the moment is bound to the same key. At the moment it's weapon change fire mode, we'll be changing that as well though. And decouple mode is only when you're in ships, that's fine, that's a conflict. Being left and right we can keep the same, that's basically spin your guy if you're in EVA mode. As I say, weapon stance I do change. Weapon stance. That stays as B because we changed walk. Let's have a look. There's a few others in here. ADS you want to keep the same. Zoom in now. Holster weapon is the same as reload for some reason. God knows why. Let's make that H. Which again, we're not going to be targeting hostiles on ground mode. What else is there? Weapon fire mode, yeah. This is annoying. If you press it by accident, you'll be changing your weapon into single shot mode when you don't mean to, and because it's C, it's easy to press by accident. So I move this up to Y, which is above holster, just so it's nice and out of the way for when you're an arena commander. Because if you're going to change it, you're going to change it and leave it normally. Most people probably aren't going to be cycling their weapon fire modes all the time. And again, these aren't conflicts that matter. Would be nice if in future versions they would say what menu these conflicts exist in, so you can easily see. Well, it's not something that's actually going to bother me when I'm on foot. I'm not going to be cycling hostile targets, but perhaps something they can implement at some point in the future. Aside from that, yeah, scoreboard will make caps lock just for consistency. And again, with AR mode, we'll make it F2 for consistency. And yeah, our third person view, again, because I don't like having F4 as a binding in any game, and because we've already got it as insert, we'll make this insert as well. Should be it for this menu. I think that's it. Spectate cameras, no one cares. Social emotes, well, there we go. We need to look at them. EVA, again, should all be standard. Nothing we need to change here. Yeah. Vehicle ground control, lights toggle. You could have this as left alt and T for consistency if you really wanted to. Now the reason being is I'm going to bind my lights to a macro key on my stick, and in the ship it's left alt and T by default, so I'm not going to be changing the defaults. So if you wanted to also control your ground vehicle with your HOTAS for some reason, which I don't personally, not necessary at this point in the game, then you might want to change that to left alt and T. Just want to be aware of. And again, I can't camera cycle in view. We're going to make insert so it matches up everything else. And I think, just checking my notes, ground vehicle movement, brake. Again, this is another one. In the ship, it's left alt and X is brake. So again, that's probably what we're going to be binding to the stick for space brake. If you wanted to make that universal, you could make that also left alt and X and control a ground vehicle with your HOTAS if you really wanted to do that. It was probably easier with the keyboard and mouse, honestly. And that's about it. Gunner, again, it's just a primary and secondary fire. Probably be using the mouse, and director mode we won't get into at this stage. If you're using director mode, you're probably not going to be needing this tutorial. So we've set up our keyboard bindings. There's only a few we needed to change, and some of those are optional. Let's export control settings, which is save our controls. So call it something you know what it is. Call mine RPT 2017. And there we go. Just to prove it has saved, we can check here. In our user folder, controls, mappings, and there it is, layout RPT 2017 exported. Right, so last thing to add in is just our joystick controls that are going to be in-game rather than macro. So if we go over joystick and HOTAS and scroll back up to the top, now I recommend you either blank all your controls first, or as you go along really, of ones they've given you. You don't really want to be using any of these ones that are pre-bound to the game normally. So let's do that, or you can make a blank profile. You might also want to blank your gamepad if you have one plugged in and there's anything wrong with the gamepad. I had an old Xbox 360 pad that I had plugged in a couple of times, and for whatever reason, or if it was lying upside down and you know your one of your triggers or one of your D sticks is held in, you might find your ship moving when you don't expect it to. So either unplug it or or unbind it there, but we won't do that now. So cockpit we can get rid of eject because it's going to be a macro. View, we don't need anything. Bounds, let's get rid of all of that. Oops. This is just right click to unbind all these. There we go. Come on. All of that gone good. Okay, so yeah, pitch, this is my y-axis. Your is my left. X. Rotation axis, as I say, we're going to have this as on my micro stick for me personally, so I'm going to set that here. Throttle up and down, let's make sure that's set properly. Again, get rid of anything that's going to be a keyboard. Oh, come on. I should stop pressing escape really, might be the best. Okay, so strafe up and down, up and down. I did roll wrong. There you go. Strafe left and right, mine is my rotational. Strafe forward, left toe, right toe brake. Strafe backwards, left toe brake. And again, we're going to need to do everything that we found previously for decoupled in terms of these, because otherwise, as soon as you go into decoupled mode, you're going to have no control, which isn't good. Afterburner and boost I have as physical buttons, so let's just pop those in. Get rid of you. Press escape, there we go. Need any of this. I feel like I missed some. Decoupled straight forward and backwards and left and right. You're going to miss some. And then up and down. Of course, the good thing is once this is done, you shouldn't have to redo it. Let's get rid of everything else. Acquire missile lock we need though. Weapons group 1 and 2 should already be set up. Weapons group 2 is actually button 3 for me. And launch missiles my pinky button. And then launch and cycle count measures are both button 5. So that's pretty much it. Even though I kind of took too long over that, it's still didn't take too long. Just make sure there's nothing else to unbind on here. Should be good. The other thing you might like to do, which I think is kind of nice, is in Onfiddle, you can, it's actually set up here as well, spectator cameras next and previous have these set up, and then you can also set in spectator zoom in and out to, missile buttons, for example, which I'll just pop in here. And then again, you're on pitch, you can leave them and interact. And that should be all. Let's make sure nothing else is bound. Doesn't really matter if EVA, ground vehicle is bound. Brilliant. And then you can just export again over your existing profile. Another bug I'll notice is, show you. Oh, you can. Oh, brilliantly added. You couldn't backspace before. This is extremely annoying. Don't know if it asked me to overwrite there. Just double check. There we go. Brilliant. Now, all that remains for my personal setup is to map the keyboard commands in games, the ones I picked out ahead of time in my control pan. And again, you look at this menu and all this going in and out of sub-menus, bollocks that they have. It's useful for you to plan this out. This is what I recommend you do. So, for example, where it was lights toggle, I would bind that to my lights toggle shift key, which was up here, and so on and so forth. You get the idea. So let's just do this one, just as an example. Left Alt and T. Bosh. What I'll do is I'll cut the video here again, rather than have you watch me find all these out, or I'll fast forward the video or something. And we'll go over a few extra points just before wrapping up, which I think may be helpful for you. Okay, it's pretty much set up, I think. We're just going to save our profile and then switch it into map mode, and I think we're done. Let's just save this. The same thing. Switch into map mode, and then you also, on this particular joystick, need to download it to the stick, so let's do that. Good, and then we can do a key check as well, just to make sure, yeah, it's working. Excellent. It's full screen. Right. So quickly going to have a look at the main options menu as well, as there's a few things to note on this. So brief options overview. Let's have a look at control options first. Now I leave pretty much everything default on here, as I have my external joystick software, but you may wish to change things around here. So inversion settings, obviously it's where it up becomes down and down becomes up. I don't touch anything here. Throttle. Now ABS and relative mode, just so you know, ABS stands for absolute, which is 1-to-1, which is what most people are going to want to use. Relative is relative to the current position. So if you have some weird ass throttle like a mouse wheel or a trackball, I guess you may need to use relative mode. Not really sure about that one. Let's have a look. With the curves again, you can edit your joystick curves here, which arguably will give you more fine control than in your external software. If you wanted to have some, really weird curve where for some reason this point of your joystick becomes super high sensitivity or something, you could in theory do that here. And there's some preset curves as well, so it's pretty nice, their implementation of this. You might want to have a look at this and choose what's right for you. As I say, I do everything in TH Manager, and that seems to be fine for me. Leave that as a one curve. And yeah, there's some dead zones already in here. I've set, even the ones that don't have anything set yet, it's best to set just a small dead zone. just to make sure you're not getting any jitter or anything. So we'll check all the controls, make sure they have a dead zone. And that's looking good. I don't think there's anything else to add to that. Obviously, note again, these aren't Windows labelings, these are device numbers, unfortunately, rather than it saying this is your MFG, which I wish it would. In terms of game settings, just quickly as well, cinematic cameras, leave that off. Context, dialogue, subtitles, you might want subtitles as you like. Again, I don't think these are in the game yet, but they might be. A flight lead pip rescue, I prefer this on personally. It allows the targeting pip be ahead of the enemy ship rather than attached to your gimbal. So it's personal preference. I don't need vibration. Disable G-Safe when boosting. Yes, I like that on. Space brake uses boost. Don't want that because we want to conserve boost for actual boost as much as possible. You can have toggle as well. Sprint toggle is for first-person shooting, and that might be useful to some people. If you're sick of holding down the sprint key in Arena Commander, you might want to dabble around with that setting. But other than that, there's not a lot extra you should need to touch. So I think that's it. I think our controller is set up. Let's just go into free flight mode and test them out, and that's going to be that. So Arena Commander, going to a single player game of free flights, what I recommend. Pick your ship, and we'll see if this is working.
Aegis Combat Assist activated.
Cool. So the first thing to bear in mind is obviously your ship's
Systems
not moving
green.
without you pressing anything. Might help if I put the sound back on. Leave that loaded now. And as I say, I like to press look ahead on to do this. And for some reason it's not working. Classic. Let's have a look. Right, we downloaded it. Yes, because this wasn't on the stick when we loaded into the game, it's having trouble recognizing what's actually going on here. So we might need to restart the game quickly. So I'll tell you what, I'll cut the video here, we'll reboot the game, and we'll make sure our controls are working properly. Okay, so what the problem there was I stupidly forgot to put it into mapped mode before I bound the keys the first time. So all I've done is come back out, restart the game, put this into mapped mode, and just quickly rebound those joystick commands only, which again didn't have to rebind the whole lot of keys because I'm making that silly mistake. So let's try this again and make sure the controls are now working. To single player free flight and find the match. And fingers crossed this now works correctly.
Aegis Combat Assist activated.
That's a good start. So we've got pitch.
Systems green.
We've got yaw. We've got roll left and right. Oop. Be a little bit slow. We need to increase the sensitivity curve there a bit to make it roll faster. We've got a strafe up, strafe down, strafe forward on the toe, strafe backwards on the other toe, and strafe right and strafe left. Fantastic. So what you might want to do when you're getting used to this is just to pick a spot like this terraformer here and just get used to flying around it so you get used to the controls. So you want to test things like your afterburner and make sure that's working correctly. Zoom in and out. Space brake. And also just flick it into decouple mode and make sure the controls work there as well, which it looks like it's absolutely fine. Brilliant. Happy days. Now, as I say, as long as you're exporting your control profiles, you shouldn't have to
Landing
redo
gear
this
deployed.
work in future
Landing gear retracted.
versions of the game. And you also want to obviously make sure you're, much like any other first-person shooter, make sure that in Star Marine your mouse sensitivity feels correct, all those kind of things, which shouldn't really need to be covered by this tutorial. So yeah, last but not least, did want to just quickly mention the tablet side of things. So I use this program called Rocket Power Grid, which is pretty decent free software. You can use it with any tablet, more or less. And as I say, it allows you to bind macros or inputs to the tablet. So it's as you'd expect. You can create a profile. Down here you've got various sort of control mappings. This represents one screen on your tablet, so there's one for the VLC media player. There's one I made for a previous version of Star System called On Foot. And yeah, it's a visual representation. It can help you memorize things like the keyboard commands. For example, you might want to just have the button for your ejector seat, or for self-destruct, or whatever the case, set to this thing, or for holster weapon used to be T. I had that here. So yeah, not to go too deeply on it. So this one's, I borrowed this background from someone on the Rockat forums, but yeah, set this to shields up, down, left and right. If we look at the macro itself, it's not the one. No, I don't want to clear my grid. Tell it's been a while since I've played around with this. Editor, there we go. So yeah, for example, this, so you've got grids here, which is your overview of grids. You've got editor at the top. And so yeah, for shield up, I had this numpad 8 as the shortcut, which is, you know, the trigger. You can change your control size as you would like. You can bind any graphic to it here, add labels, do all that kind of good stuff, and fairly quickly you can put together a controller profile that'll just work with the tablet, with whatever tablet that you have. So yeah, might be another option for you to look into. As I say, in terms of my personal setup, I'm hoping to add the track IR functionality, as well as possible voice commands when I get that, when I look into that. A lot of the time when I'm playing Star Citizen, I'm usually kind of talking to people, so I don't know if I want voice commands going off at the same time while I've got friends in TeamSpeak or whatever that who are not necessarily playing the same game. But yeah, regardless, just something to consider. So that's pretty much it for this guide. Hope you found it useful. You can comment below with any questions that you might have, and I'll try my best to answer them. As we've said before, I might do some other tutorial type videos going forward for this build of the game. So feel free to subscribe if you want to see more from me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the verse.